My 9-year-old sister asked why we help people who can't help themselves, then poisoned our neighbor's cat to see what would happen when she made her first friend Lucas. At 14, I found her suffocating him with a plastic bag on our couch. She told the police he'd just stopped breathing and framed me as the unstable sibling who'd been stalking her. She got 7 years in psychiatric care after they found her journal, documenting how she'd been practicing on animals first. When my younger sister was 9, she looked up from her homework and asked me why we had to help people who couldn't help themselves. I was 16, stressed about SATs and clueless. "Because that's what good people do, Nora," I muttered, putting my headphones back on. She sat there a moment longer before closing her notebook. I should have paid attention to the way she frowned. The signs started small. At family dinners, she'd point out which kid at school cried during gym class. She kept a notebook, rating classmates by usefulness. I chalked it up to weird kid stuff. Then Mr. Delaney knocked on our door holding his tabby cat. It looked awful. Patchy fur, red eyes, blue tongue. That's when he said it. He'd recovered security footage of Nora putting something into its food bowl in the backyard. My head whipped toward her, expecting a denial, but she just stood there with a smirk. I turned back to Mr. Delaney, who now had tears in his eyes. "I'm so sorry. Nora has a rare form of autism we're trying to manage," I lied, handing him $300 before closing the door. "Nora, what the actual hell?" She shrugged. "Don't blame me. It was already old. I just wanted to see what would happen." That's when I knew this wasn't just childhood weirdness. But our dad was gone, and Mom worked 16-hour shifts at the hospital, so naturally, raising Nora fell to me. The next morning, I did the most responsible thing I could think of. I went on a Barnes & Noble spree. I dropped nearly $150 on child development books, and stayed up all night reading about conduct disorders. I didn't stop until I felt like I had enough knowledge to be the next Mary Poppins. I always thought our first serious talk would be about puberty or relationships. Instead, it was about empathy and basic decency. I thought I'd made progress until I finished and she tilted her head. "So, if natural selection is real, why do we keep the defective ones around?" The word defective made my skin crawl, but I knew I couldn't stop there. I kept pushing forward. I found a therapist who specialized in childhood behavioral issues. I signed her up for softball, hoping team sports might teach cooperation. I even made her volunteer with me at the animal shelter, under constant supervision, obviously. For months, there were no complaints from teachers. She seemed invested in therapy. I finally exhaled. Then I got the call. I was at work. It was Miss Grant, Nora's support group leader. Her voice was trembling. I need to talk to you about Nora. We found our therapy hamster in her backpack. There were marks on it, injection marks, and a notebook documenting its stress responses to different stimuli. My stomach dropped. I thanked her and hung up before she could hear my panic in my voice. I wanted so badly for this to all be a misunderstanding. And miraculously, it seemed like it might be. Because that evening, when I confronted Nora, she had tears in her eyes. "Miss Grant has been after me from the start. She thinks I'm creepy just because I ask questions. Check the hamster. I bet there's nothing wrong with it." She was right. When I insisted on seeing the hamster, it looked totally fine. No marks, no notebook. Nora had never lied to me before, not even about the cat. She admitted that right away. So I believed her. I pulled her from the group that same week. Surely the therapy and softball were enough, right? Then a month later, Nora said something that made my heart stutter. "I made a friend. A real one." She beamed. She showed me a photo of a boy named Lucas. Scrawny, glasses, probably also a freshman. "He's in my school. He's perfect. He's perfect for me." The way she corrected herself made my chest tighten. But her eyes looked sincere, soft even. I remembered being 14, how overwhelming first crushes felt. Maybe this was what she needed, a real connection.
I met Lucas that Friday when Nora invited him over. He was exactly what I'd imagined. Quiet, anxious, picked at his food, but he smiled when Nora spoke. After dinner, I told them they could hang out in the living room while I cleaned up. I wanted to give them space, but still keep them in sight. I was scrubbing dishes when I heard a thud, then silence. The kind of silence that only happens when something is very wrong. I found them by the couch. Nora had a plastic bag wrapped around Lucas's head, her full weight pressing down on his chest. His face was a dark, terrifying red, his eyes wide and unfocused, legs barely twitching. I shoved her off, but his body was limp. No breath, no pulse. I started CPR, screaming at Nora to call 911. She just stood there, calm. "He didn't even try to push me off," she said with a laugh. "I knew he wouldn't. That's why I picked him." My hand shook uncontrollably as I dialed. The dispatcher answered on the second ring. I forced words through my tightening throat while Nora walked over to the kitchen sink and washed her hands, methodically. She dried them on the dish towel, then came back to stand beside me, tilting her head at Lucas's lifeless body. The dispatcher kept asking questions. I had to give our address 3 times before she could understand me through the gasping. Nora reached down and smoothed Lucas's hair, adjusting his glasses until they sat neatly on his face. Her movements were precise, tender even. My stomach flipped. She repositioned his arm so it lay naturally across his chest, straightened his legs so they lay parallel. The efficiency of it made my skin crawl. When she grabbed a throw pillow from the couch and gently tucked it beneath his head, I nearly vomited. She was staging him. The sirens were growing louder. Nora sat cross-legged beside Lucas, taking his hand in both of hers. She began rocking slowly, practicing expressions in the TV's reflection. First confusion, then shock, eventually settling on devastation. By the time the paramedics burst through the door, her face was streaming with tears. 2 of them rushed to Lucas, while a third gently pulled me away. I couldn't stop the CPR compressions. My arms burned, but I kept going until they physically pulled me back. Nora stayed beside Lucas, her voice trembling as she explained that they were watching a movie and he just stopped breathing. Her voice cracked perfectly on that last word. I watched her unconsciously mirror Lucas's final expression as she spoke, the slightly parted lips, the glazed-over eyes. Then she caught herself and shifted back to her mask of grief. The lead paramedic worked on Lucas for minutes before making the call. Time of death, 7:43 p.m. Police arrived soon after. 2 officers, one older, with gray at the temples, the other younger, jumpy, always touching his holster. They separated us immediately. Nora stayed in the living room with the younger one. I was led to the kitchen with the veteran. He asked me to start from the beginning. I told him about Nora inviting Lucas over, the dinner, letting them hang out. My voice held steady until I got to the part about what I saw. Then everything came out at once. The bag, her on top of him, what she said about picking him. The officer wrote everything down, but his expression stayed unreadable. Through the doorway, I saw Nora gesturing wildly to the younger cop, dabbing her eyes, pointing toward the couch where they'd been sitting. She pulled out her phone, showing him something. Pictures, I realized, from earlier. Evidence of a happy, normal evening. The officer asked if our parents were home. I explained that Mom was at the hospital. He requested her number and stepped away to call. I strained to hear Nora's voice from the other room. She was saying Lucas had been tired recently, that he'd mentioned feeling dizzy earlier. Lies with just enough truth to sound real. Then my phone buzzed. Nora had already started texting the family. Something terrible happened. Lucas stopped breathing. I'm so scared. The messages kept coming. Our aunts, Grandma, Mom's best friend, each one painting her as the frightened victim. Before anyone could hear my side, the officer returned. He told me Mom was on her way. They'd need to wait for her before formally questioning Nora, since she was still a minor. But I was 18, so we could continue. He asked me about Nora's mental health history.
I hesitated. Mention the therapy, the support group incident, the cat. It would strengthen my case, but it would also paint me as negligent. I had known Nora had issues and still let her be alone with Lucas. Before I could decide what to say, Mom burst through the door, still in her scrubs. She took one look at the covered body in the living room, and her knees gave out. Nora flew into her arms, sobbing about how scared she was, how Lucas just stopped breathing, how I went frantic trying to save him, but it was too late. Mom held her, eyes locked on me over Nora's shoulder. Her gaze was searching, silently asking something I couldn't answer, not with Nora right there, not with the police watching. Nora turned her face into Mom's shoulder, but I saw it, the faint lift at the corner of her mouth, and behind Mom's back, her fingers moved. Natural selection. She mouthed the words without sound. The younger officer suggested that Mom take Nora to the hospital to be checked for shock. As they gathered their things, Nora clung to her mom, whimpering about how pale Lucas had looked, how she tried to help, how she just didn't know what to do. Mom stroked her hair, murmuring reassurances, already sliding into full protective mode. They left me behind, alone with the older officer and the newly arrived crime scene team. I gave my statement 2 more times. Each retelling felt more distant, less like it had actually happened to me. The officer asked if we had any security cameras. That's when I remembered, my work laptop in the living room. It had motion detection software running. I moved toward it, but the officer stopped me. Evidence, he said. It had to be handled properly. Nora must have noticed it too, because she'd already begun her counterattack. Outside, I could hear her voice rising above the chatter, telling our extended family about how I was obsessed with monitoring her, how I kept cameras on her constantly, preparing her defense before anyone even asked questions. Lucas's parents arrived in a storm of grief and panic. His mother collapsed at the sight of the covered form. His father demanded answers. What happened? How could this happen? Why hadn't anyone called sooner? I tried to approach them, to say something, anything, but the officer held me back. It was still an active crime scene, he reminded me. In the middle of the chaos, our grandmother arrived for her usual Friday night dinner. She hadn't been told what was going on. One look at the flashing lights and emergency responders, and she clutched her chest. Someone called for her heart meds. They were in her purse. Her purse was in the car. The car was blocked by the ambulance. What should have been a simple task turned into an ordeal. While everyone rushed to help our grandmother, Nora made her move. She approached Lucas's parents slowly, hands wringing, voice trembling. She spoke softly, said Lucas was her first real friend, that he'd been kind to her, that she didn't understand what had happened. His mother, desperate for any glimpse into his son's final moments, pulled Nora into a tight embrace. Somewhere in the house, a cat began yowling. No one had fed it. It was Mr. Delaney's new cat, the one he got after Nora poisoned the first. He'd asked us to look after it while he was away for the weekend. Another responsibility on a night already overflowing with them. The officer said I couldn't leave the scene yet. Nora volunteered. Of course she did. She slipped out of Lucas's mother's arms with a soft promise to share the photos they'd taken earlier. As she passed me on the way to the back door, her face was set in an expression of concern, but her eyes were stone cold. She returned a few minutes later, shaking her head solemnly. The cat must have gotten out, she reported. All the people coming and going. I left food out. Hopefully it comes back. Another lie, another small cruelty. Mom's friend Diane showed up to collect her daughter who had been supposed to sleep over. She took in the scene, cops, paramedics, our grandmother being helped, Lucas's grieving parents, and immediately zeroed in on me. I must have looked as shattered as I felt because she gently pulled me aside, rubbing my back. She told me how strong I'd been since Dad left, how much I'd taken on with Nora. But even strong people break, she said, her voice kind. The comparison stung. She didn't see someone whose sister had just killed a boy. She saw someone in the middle of another breakdown, just like after Dad. My laptop still sat on the coffee table, its camera pointed directly at the couch where it had all happened.
The motion detection software would have caught everything. Nora's attack, Lucas's struggle, her chilling confession. But the moment I mentioned it to the officer, Nora jumped in. She said she'd noticed me recording her and Lucas earlier, watching them through the laptop camera while I was in the kitchen. It made her uncomfortable, she said, but she hadn't wanted to embarrass me in front of her friend. The implication was crystal clear. I wasn't collecting evidence. I was a creepy older sibling spying on my sister's innocent date. The younger officer made a note. When I protested, tried to explain that it was just motion-triggered security software, I sounded defensive, unhinged, guilty. The crime scene techs bagged the laptop. The officer assured me they'd analyze it, but Nora had already poisoned the narrative. Whatever they found would be filtered through her version of events, an obsessive sister recording her every move, possibly even filming minors without consent. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Nora's first wave of texts had done exactly what they were meant to. Relatives asked if she was okay, if she needed anything, how awful this all must be for her. A few asked about me, but only to check if I was supporting Nora through this trauma. She had told the story before I even had the chance to open my mouth. I tried to text Miss Grant about the hamster incident. Maybe if she knew what had happened, she'd finally speak up about what she saw. But as I reread my frantic message, it looked exactly like the kind of thing Nora was accusing me of: harassment, instability, deflecting blame. I deleted the message before sending it, but in my mind, the damage was already done. The house filled up. Lucas's extended family arrived. So did our aunts and uncles, Mom's co-workers who had heard what happened. With each new arrival, Nora had a fresh audience. She cycled through sorrow, shock, and confusion with terrifying grace. Every now and then, in the middle of a sob, she'd catch my eye, and I'd see that flicker of satisfaction. Child Protective Services showed up around 10 p.m. They said they needed to evaluate the situation, ensure Nora's safety. The irony nearly made me laugh. They asked for her medical records, therapy documentation, anything relevant. But Mom was too dazed, too medicated with shock to string a sentence together. They'd have to wait until morning. I sat alone in the kitchen while the living room turned into an active crime scene. Through the window I could see neighbors gathering, talking in hushed voices. By morning, it would be everywhere. The Facebook moms, the next door posts, every group chat and gossip text chain, and none of them would include the truth. Nora still found time to twist the knife. She brought water to Lucas's mom and mentioned, with soft sadness, how Lucas had been teaching her to play Minecraft, how they'd been planning to build their own server. She even pulled out her phone to show them their Discord messages, harmless chats about homework and games, carefully selected to paint a picture of an innocent friendship. What she didn't show were the messages I knew existed, the ones where she was testing him, seeing how far she could push him, how much control she could assert. But I had no proof, just the certainty that Nora never did anything without calculation. The medical examiner arrived and began preparing Lucas's body for transport. As they wheeled him out, Nora collapsed again. This time a full performance, shaking, hyperventilating, gasping about how real it felt now, how final it was. The paramedics checked her vitals and suggested she be taken in for evaluation. Mom agreed instantly. Before leaving, Nora made the rounds. She whispered something into our grandmother's ear that earned her a gentle head pat. She hugged each of our aunts, Lucas's grieving parents, even the officers. With each embrace, she wove another thread into her web of sympathy. Then she turned to me. She hesitated. The room stilled, watching. Would the broken girl hug her older sister? Slowly, she stepped forward, her movements trembling. She wrapped her arms around me. To everyone else, she looked like a fragile child seeking comfort. But I felt her fingers dig into my back. I heard her whisper. When she pulled away, her eyes brimmed with tears. She touched my cheek gently, then returned to Mom's side, the perfect image of a grieving, traumatized girl who had just lost someone special. She had already won this round before I even realized we were playing. As they prepared to leave for the hospital, the older officer told me I'd need to come to the station tomorrow to give a formal statement.
They would have more questions. The laptop would be analyzed. The scene would be processed. Everything would be done by the book, the officer assured me. But I already knew it wouldn't matter. Nora had already written the story. Unstable older sibling, recently traumatized by her father's abandonment, possibly having another breakdown, obsessed with monitoring her innocent little sister, making paranoid accusations in the middle of a tragic accident. She'd handed them a version of events that was easier to believe than the truth. The house emptied out slowly. Lucas's parents were the last to leave. His mother clutched a photo Nora had given her, a selfie of the two of them from earlier that evening, both smiling at the camera, happy, normal. The last image of her son alive, courtesy of his killer. I stood in the middle of our now empty living room, staring at the spot where Lucas had died. The carpet looked untouched. No blood, no signs of a struggle, no proof of the horror that had unfolded there. Just like with the cat, just like with the hamster, Nora knew how to erase herself, how to twist truth into lies, and lies into something that looked believable. My phone buzzed one last time. A text from Nora. Thank you for trying to save him. I know you did everything you could. I love you. Attached was a photo of her in a hospital bed, looking small and fragile, with Mom sitting beside her, holding her hand. The perfect ending to her first act. But I knew this wasn't the finale. It was only the beginning of Nora's performance. And I was the only one who could see the wires. The question wasn't whether I could stop her. It was whether anyone would believe me. Tomorrow would bring formal interviews, statements, investigations. But tonight, Nora had full control of the narrative. And I stood alone in a house that still smelled faintly of pasta and death, knowing that my sister had murdered a boy and framed me for negligence in a single, flawless move. The cat never came back. 3 days later, I found its body under the back porch. But by then, nobody cared about another small tragedy in a week already drowning in them. Nora had moved on to bigger game, and I was running out of time. Nora's grief counseling began the following week with Miss Rodriguez, my old sophomore year English teacher who had transitioned into social work after finishing her master's. Nora specifically asked for her. I understood why during the third session when Ms. Rodriguez pulled me aside afterward. She held a folder filled with photocopied essays I'd written back in her class. One about family stress after Dad left, another about feeling responsible for Nora's emotional development, a third about my fear of failing as a substitute parent. Nora had found them in our shared Google Drive and printed them out. She had highlighted passages about my control issues, my obsessive monitoring, my self-appointed role in managing her behavior. The detective assigned to Lucas's case, Detective Chen, called me in for another interview. She sat across from me in a small gray room and slid several printed screenshots across the table. Text messages, ones I had sent to my best friend when I was 17, just venting teen angst. One stood out, highlighted in yellow. I could strangle her sometimes. She drives me absolutely insane. Nora had provided the messages, along with a timeline of my so-called escalating aggression towards her. Detective Chen asked me to explain. I tried, but every clarification sounded like a cover-up. Every attempt at context only made me seem more unhinged. Meanwhile, our grandmother started coming to visit Nora daily during her recovery period, while I was banned from the house. After 2 weeks of this, Grandma's story began to change. She started repeating things that didn't line up, like insisting I'd been at work the night Lucas died, when I actually had been home. And every time she said something wrong, Nora would gently correct her, patting her hand sweetly, casting me that knowing look across the room. Then came the footage. The Ring, doorbell camera at the Johnsons 3 doors down, became pivotal evidence. It showed me arriving home at 5:47 p.m. and Nora arriving with Lucas at 6:15 p.m. That 28-minute gap was enough for Nora's lawyer to suggest I'd had time to plan something. The camera captured nothing that happened inside, but the timeline was folded seamlessly into Nora's story. I kept gathering what I could, screenshotted Lucas's social media posts before his family could memorialize his accounts, trying to preserve the version of him that existed before Nora erased it and replaced it with hers.
Lucas's last public post, made 3 hours before his death, showed how excited he was to be spending time with Nora. But I also found older posts where he mentioned feeling overwhelmed by her intensity. Brief, quickly deleted comments about how she could be a bit much sometimes. Nora's former softball coach posted on Facebook about the team's upcoming memorial game in honor of Lucas. In the comments, she mentioned how sad it had been when Nora quit the team 2 weeks prior due to family stress. That post directly contradicted Nora's official timeline, where she claimed she had been at practice the day before Lucas died. I screenshot everything, but when I tried showing it to Detective Chen, he cautioned me about interfering with an active investigation. The more I tried to help, the more it seemed like I was sabotaging myself. Then, my old therapist, Dr. Martinez, received a subpoena. Nora's lawyer wanted access to any records involving sibling conflict or family dysfunction. The sessions I'd attended after Dad left, me trying to cope with anxiety, were now being weaponized against me. Lucas's memorial was held 2 weeks after his death. I went. even though Mom asked me not to. I sat in the back row, keeping my distance. Nora took the podium and delivered a eulogy that had the entire congregation in tears. She spoke about Lucas's kindness, about how you taught her to see the good in people. Halfway through, I noticed my phone buzzing in my pocket. It was recording. I hadn't started it. When I reached to stop it, Nora's eyes locked onto mine across the church. She saw me and pivoted immediately, weaving it into her speech, mentioning how some people couldn't even respect Lucas's memory without trying to create drama. After that, the police required me to attend supervised interviews at the station. These meant spending hours in the same building where Nora was also being questioned. I'd see her in the hallways. She'd smirk when no one else was looking. During one visit, she walked past the observation room where I waited, holding up her phone. Her wallpaper was a photo of Lucas. When his mother saw it later, Nora fell apart in front of her, sobbing about how it helped her feel close to him. Janet, one of Mom's coworkers who had initially been supportive, suddenly pulled away. Her husband worked in hospital administration and had heard rumors about a pending investigation into missing medication from Mom's floor. The unspoken message was clear: supporting our family might have consequences. Janet apologized, quietly. She said she had to think of her 3 kids and couldn't afford to risk her job. I understood, but it still hurt. Then, Nora's lawyer reached out with a plea deal. If I agreed to testify that my behavior had negatively influenced Nora's development, she might plead down to involuntary manslaughter. I refused. I wasn't going to lie under oath. Immediately, my refusal was reframed in court documents. It was painted as me being vengeful, that I would rather see my sister serve life in prison than take even the slightest responsibility for our family dysfunction. Then the autopsy report came in. Lucas hadn't died from strangulation, like I had originally believed. The cause of death was suffocation. The bruises around his neck weren't from external force. They were from his own hands as he desperately tried to tear the plastic bag off. That detail made Nora's original claim that he had just stopped breathing all the more chilling. But it also meant my statement was technically inaccurate, which her attorney used to attack my credibility as a witness. Both Nora and I discovered that Lucas had been filming TikToks about dealing with toxic friendships. Draft videos, unposted. When investigators accessed his account, they found edited clips, selections that made it look like he was working on a project about forgiveness, about reformed bullies, and giving people second chances. Nora had somehow accessed his account. She had modified the content before anyone else could see the originals. Then Mom was given a choice by the Department of Children and Families. If she believed I was dangerous, she could keep custody of Nora. But if she supported my version of events, Nora would likely be removed from the home. That night, she called me in tears. She said she couldn't lose both of us. She said she had to choose the child she still had a chance to save. And just like that, I was banned from my childhood home. Along with that, I lost access to everything inside: photos, files, the physical evidence I'd been hoping to gather. But I wasn't done. I started reaching out to other parents, classmates of Nora's, quietly asking questions, trying to find out what kind of girl Nora had really been at school, hoping someone else had noticed the cracks before it was too late.
Most people were polite but distant, clearly uneasy with my questions. A few mentioned their kids had said Nora seemed different since Lucas's death, but no one was willing to put anything in writing. Not one would go on record. One afternoon, near the courthouse, I ran into Melissa, Nora's lawyer's assistant, at a nearby coffee shop. She was on the phone, venting about her caseload, and I overheard her mention that Nora's psychiatric evaluation was scheduled for the next morning. That slip gave me an opportunity. I timed my own evidence submission to coincide with the evaluation, hoping the psychiatrist would see the pattern I'd spent months documenting. Before Nora realized I still had access to our shared family Google Photos account, I downloaded everything. Years of images. Pictures showing her transformation from a curious little girl to someone who watched people like test subjects. Family events where she stood apart, observing instead of joining in. Screenshots of her notebooks and lists. One titled Emotional Response Catalog, with meticulous notes on how people reacted to different triggers. Then, Lucas's father, divorced and grieving, turned angry. He wanted to sue our family for wrongful death. Now we were fighting a civil case on top of the criminal one, which meant I missed my own psychiatric evaluation, one the court had ordered as part of the family assessment. My absence was marked down as non-compliance. I had already maxed out my credit cards hiring a private investigator to look into Nora's behavior at school. Meanwhile, she used Mom's Amazon account to order books on grief, trauma, and healing, timing it so the delivery drivers would see her reading on the porch. The show never stopped. Things came to a head when I walked into Lucas's favorite boba shop and saw Nora there with classmates, performing grief in front of an audience. My presence caused the scene. One of the teenage employees cried. The whole encounter went viral, painting me as the unhinged sister harassing a grieving child. I lost my job at the bookstore shortly after. Customers complained that I made them uncomfortable. The owner apologized but said he couldn't ignore multiple complaints. The woman hired to replace me was the mother of one of Nora's friends, someone who'd publicly supported Nora on Facebook. I ended up sleeping in my car while Nora redecorated my old bedroom as a grief sanctuary. It felt like mockery. She posted photos of the transformation online, captioned with sweet statements about creating a safe space to process trauma. That room, where I'd spent years trying to raise her right, was now a shrine to her performance. Mom begged me to stop, to let Lucas rest, to get help for what she called my delusions. The word stung more than I expected because I could see how it looked. From the outside, every piece of evidence I collected could be twisted into something else. Every effort I made to expose Nora made me look less stable. And the consequences of my investigation were spreading. I shared some screenshots with Marcus, Lucas's best friend, hoping he'd back up my concerns. Instead, his parents found out and filed a complaint with the school. Marcus was suspended for spreading harmful content about a fellow student. The fallout strained his family so badly, his parents separated. The guilt crushed me. My search for justice was hurting the very people I wanted to protect. But stopping meant letting Nora win. So I kept going. Even as more parents asked me to stay away from their kids, even as Nora's supporters used every ripple of collateral damage against me. Mrs. Chen, the last adult who still gave me the benefit of the doubt, invited me for coffee. She'd taught both Nora and me in elementary school. I hoped she might understand. Instead, she gently suggested that maybe Nora was just a broken girl coping badly with grief. When I tried to explain about the patterns, the manipulations, the years of escalation, she just looked at me with this deep, painful pity. I couldn't finish. How do you explain calculated cruelty without sounding cruel yourself? In a last-ditch attempt, I made a public post. I admitted to failing Nora. I said I hadn't gotten her help when I should have. I thought that kind of vulnerability might finally make people listen. Instead, it backfired. Nora's lawyer filed it in court documents, an admission of guilt, proof of negligence, confirmation that I was the unstable one all along.
While going through old messages, I found texts from Lucas, sent weeks before his death. Casual mentions of Nora being weird or intense, things I'd brushed off as typical teen drama at the time. But one message wouldn't leave me alone. Nora's acting strange lately. She keeps asking these weird, hypothetical questions about trust and loyalty. Should I be worried? I told him not to overthink it, said Nora was just socially awkward and needed patience. Now that response haunted me. Nora's lawyer filed a motion to try her as a juvenile rather than an adult, and they used my own evidence to support it. The motion framed my actions as a pattern of harassment, proof of the toxic family dynamic that supposedly pushed Nora to a breaking point. Every file, every screenshot, every message I had gathered was turned around, evidence not of her guilt, but of my obsession. To understand Nora's motives meant confronting things I didn't want to admit. She had felt abandoned when Dad left, and I'd been so caught in my own grief that I hadn't seen hers. Her early questions, like why we help people who can't help themselves, had been a sincere, if unsettling attempt to make sense of why he hadn't stayed. But somewhere, that abandonment warped into something darker, a hunger to matter completely to someone, even if it meant destroying them. To get access to her early therapy records, I had to break into Mom's locked home office while she was at work. I'd made a promise when Dad left that I'd never violate her trust. Crossing that line felt like betraying the last piece of myself that was still intact. But in those files, I found notes, clinical documentation showing Nora's early signs of conduct disorder, symptoms that preceded Dad's departure. It wasn't trauma that made her this way, not entirely. Fighting Nora meant becoming the very thing she accused me of: strategic, manipulative, cold. I had to stay 3 steps ahead. I had to anticipate her lies, use people's emotions against them. I hated what I was turning into, but it was the only way to beat her at her own game. I manipulated the trust of her only remaining friend, Sarah. She thought she was helping me understand Nora's grief, and I let her. Through her, I accessed Nora's current journal. The guilt nearly broke me. But inside were details, proof of premeditation, patterns of control, timing, notes about emotional triggers, names. Lucas's name. Still, even the victories felt hollow. When I proved Nora had lied about where she was the week before Lucas died, there was no relief, especially not when she broke down sobbing in court about how much she missed him. And I cried too. We stood by his locker after the hearing, 2 people mourning in twisted, opposing ways. Her for the experiment she had lost. Me for the boy I couldn't save. Nora's counter-accusations gained traction with people who couldn't reconcile the sweet, soft-spoken girl they knew with the manipulative predator I described. She said I'd groomed her for violence, fed her a steady diet of true crime shows and books about abnormal psychology. My purchase history became evidence. My conduct disorder reading material, once bought in desperation to understand her, was now proof of my obsession with diagnosing her. Everything hinged on Miss Grant testifying about the hamster. She'd moved out of state after leaving the support group, and tracking her down took weeks. When I finally found her, she hesitated. Her husband now works for a company that contracts with the hospital where Mom was employed. Testifying could cost them his job. I leaned on every connection I had. I used my past with one of Nora's classmates, a boy I'd once tutored in math, to try and pressure his mother into sharing what she knew. She refused. I reminded her I'd helped her son when they couldn't afford a tutor. The look on her face when she realized I was using that goodwill against her made me physically sick. Later, her son asked me quietly, "Why didn't you try to help Nora like you helped me?" I had no answer. Even inside the hospital, loyalties split, not along lines of truth, but shift schedules and union alliances. Mom's night shift coworkers closed ranks around her and Nora. The day shift staff, who'd known me longer, expressed quiet doubts, but doubts and testimony were 2 very different things. Most chose silence. The prosecutor told me plainly, without physical evidence, convicting a 14-year-old was nearly impossible, especially one like Nora, so soft-spoken, so seemingly remorseful. Juries wanted to believe in redemption. They didn't want to see a child as a killer. Character evidence, context, circumstance, none of it was enough. We needed irrefutable proof of premeditation. That's when Lucas's mother became my fiercest ally. Fueled by grief and clarity, she tapped into her support network. She reached out to Lucas's youth pastor, his teachers, his online gaming friends. She was searching for anything, anyone who had seen what I had seen, who had felt it, the shift, the performance, the darkness behind Nora's eyes.
She'd pulled every string, called in every favor, chased every lead, driven by a mother's grief and a desperate need for justice. One woman from her support group came forward with security footage from a park near her apartment, where Nora and Lucas had met several times. The video quality was poor, grainy, but it was enough to see Nora practicing something with a plastic bag,
weeks before Lucas's death. The woman who provided the footage couldn't testify due to her immigration status, but still, this was something. The footage revealed something even more devastating. Lucas had known Nora was dangerous. In one clip, he subtly stepped away when she moved too close. He kept a cautious distance, still trying to engage her. He hadn't been naive. He'd been documenting her behavior in his own way. Screenshots of alarming messages, voice recordings of their conversations. He'd seen the warning signs, but he'd kept coming back, thinking he could help. Hidden in a backup cloud account, one his parents didn't even know existed, was everything. Weeks of escalating messages where Nora pushed boundaries, asked disturbing hypotheticals, grew frustrated whenever Lucas showed compassion for others. And his replies? Always gentle, always trying to steer her back to empathy. The files painted a heartbreaking picture of a boy who saw Nora not as a monster, but as someone lost, and he believed she could be saved. His final journal entry, written the morning of his death, read, "Everyone deserves a second chance. If I can show her what friendship really means, maybe she'll change." He'd willingly risked himself for someone he thought just needed to be seen. Knowing Lucas's intentions changed everything for me. He hadn't been a passive victim. He'd been a sacrifice, conscious, intentional, hopeful. To honor him meant not just seeking punishment, but the right kind of justice. The kind that acknowledged both his death and his faith in someone even I had given up on. Then, Nora made a mistake. Her overconfidence cracked her armor. In her court-ordered therapy journal, she wrote about the practice sessions with the hamster and the cat. She described them clinically as essential exercises in understanding mortality. She was so certain her journal was confidential, she never considered that her therapist was mandated by law to report behavior posing harm to others. And so, it became evidence. When I presented it in court, there was no satisfaction, just a sick, empty kind of relief. That's when Nora realized she'd been watched more closely than she ever knew. And in that moment, when control slipped from her fingers, I saw her true face. For a second, the courtroom saw it too. The precision cracked. The calculations surfaced. No more misunderstood girl, no more grieving sister, just the quiet, clinical mind of someone who had rehearsed death. The pattern was undeniable. The hamster, the cat, then Lucas. Each selected deliberately. The hamster for its helplessness, the cat for its trust, Lucas for his empathy. As we approached the final juvenile court hearing, both sides dug in. Nora's lawyer argued for mental health treatment instead of incarceration, emphasizing her age, trauma, and potential for rehabilitation. My attorney pressed for the maximum sentence allowed under juvenile law. The courtroom divided. Some pushed for compassion, others, justice. The rift was visible even in the seating, Nora's supporters on one side, Lucas's on the other, with a few uncertain souls between, unwilling to take a side. I sat directly behind the prosecution table, where Nora couldn't avoid seeing me. During a break, I caught her unconsciously rubbing her thumb and forefinger together, mimicking the motion used to seal a plastic bag. When she saw me watching, she stopped immediately. But I had seen other tells, too. The tilt of her head when lying, the subtle smile whenever she thought she had won a point. The jury missed those things. They focused on her trembling voice, her tears, her youthful face. But the truth came out anyway, built slowly, piece by piece. Lucas's journal, Nora's therapy records, the park footage, the messages. Together they formed a picture too clear to ignore, even with her best performance. Then, finally, Ms. Grant agreed to testify. Despite her husband's job concerns, she came. She sat in the witness box, fingers clutching a silver cross at her neck. She said she'd prayed over it. She couldn't lie for the sake of a dead child's memory. She described everything. Finding the therapy hamster in Nora's backpack, the injection marks, the notebook detailing its reactions to various stimuli.
Nora's lawyer did everything possible to discredit Miss Grant, but her quiet dignity and clear reluctance to testify only made her more believable. She wasn't dramatic. She didn't want to be there, but she told the truth. And it landed. The park footage turned out to be pivotal. Frame-by-frame analysis revealed Nora practicing with plastic bags weeks before Lucas's death. She'd timed herself, adjusted her grip, experimented with different approaches. The prosecutor presented it slowly, methodically, letting the images speak for themselves. Nora's lawyer objected repeatedly, but the judge allowed the footage to remain in evidence. Then came Lucas's journal. His entries painted a devastating portrait, one of increasing dread. He recorded Nora's questions about death, her obsession with control, her loyalty tests. In one entry, just 3 days before he died, he wrote about how she had asked him to hold his breath until he passed out to prove his trust. He'd refused. She was disappointed. That same week, he wrote that he still believed she could change. The tech teacher who had authenticated Lucas's phone backup took the stand next. He testified, reluctantly, that the metadata showed no evidence of tampering. He voiced concerns about privacy and ethics, but ultimately the judge ruled the backup admissible, given the stakes. Then came the psychiatric evaluation results. The court-appointed psychologist explained that Nora suffered from severe attachment disorder stemming from Dad's abandonment. She described how Nora's inability to form healthy bonds had mutated into a need for absolute control in relationships. In Nora's mind, real love meant total submission. She didn't see Lucas's death as a tragedy. She saw it as his failure, a sign that he didn't trust her enough to pass the final test. Then came the journal. Her therapy journal became the prosecution's strongest weapon. Entry after entry, clinical, methodical, detached, detailed her experiments, the hamster, the cat, their stress responses, timed reactions, notes on escalation strategies. She'd planned to move on to human subjects. She'd selected Lucas because he was kind, because he was empathetic, because she knew he would try to help her. That made him the perfect subject. The most damning entry was dated just a week before Lucas died. Nora had written about her growing frustration with his boundaries, how he kept resisting her tests, how she needed to make him understand what real trust meant. She'd even sketched diagrams of our living room, marked camera angles, blind spots. When confronted with the journal in court, Nora's mask finally cracked. She started rocking in her chair. Her voice turned frantic. She claimed it was all fiction, creative writing assignments to help her process grief. But the entries predated Lucas's death by months. The prosecutor calmly pointed to earlier passages, entries from over a year before, describing her first tests on animals, her precise language, her detachment, her satisfaction. Then Ms. Grant's testimony landed like a hammer. She told the courtroom about finding the hamster in Nora's backpack, the injection marks, the observation notebook, Nora's lack of remorse, her calculated calm. Ms. Grant admitted she had doubted herself at the time because the hamster looked fine later, but now understood Nora must have switched it with a healthy one. Nora's lawyer did what he could. He framed her actions as the cries of a deeply disturbed child. He presented her spotless academic record, glowing teacher reviews, stories of her volunteer work and community service. But the narrative had shifted too far. The courtroom had seen too much. Then Lucas's mother took the stand for her victim impact statement. Her voice never shook. She spoke of her son's kindness, his unrelenting belief in redemption, his desire to save Nora even as fear crept into his writing. She read from his final journal entry, where he wrote that choosing love over self-preservation wasn't weakness, it was strength. The courtroom fell silent. She ended by saying she didn't want revenge, she wanted Nora to get help, because that's what Lucas would have wanted. The judge called a recess before final arguments. In the hallway, Nora approached me while her attorney was distracted. She tilted her head just slightly, studying my face like she always had. Her fingers moved subtly, spelling words only I would understand. Natural selection. Failed test. Then she smiled and returned to her attorney's side. During closing arguments, the prosecutor outlined it all. The pattern of escalation, the premeditation, the rehearsed grief, the charm, the deception. He acknowledged the psychiatric disorder, but made it clear explanation was not excuse. Mental illness could explain what Nora had done, but it couldn't excuse the death of a boy who tried to save her.
Nora's lawyer made one last passionate argument for rehabilitation over punishment. He claimed her actions were rooted in untreated trauma and deep abandonment issues. With the right care and a therapeutic facility, he said, Nora could learn how to build healthy relationships. Sending her to juvenile detention would only forge a more dangerous adult. The judge took 3 days to deliberate. When court reconvened, the room was packed again, split right down the middle, just like before. Nora sat motionless, hands folded, every inch the image of remorse. But I saw her eyes flicking to the exits, calculating distances, still measuring, still in control. The judge's decision was carefully worded, carefully balanced. She acknowledged the overwhelming evidence of premeditation, but also Nora's age, her mental health diagnosis, her chance, however slim, for change. The sentence: secure psychiatric treatment until age 21, with regular evaluations. If deemed unfit at that point, she'd be transferred to an adult facility. If her treatment failed, prison awaited. Nora didn't cry, she didn't flinch, she just gave the faintest nod, like the verdict had landed exactly where she'd predicted. She turned to look at Mom, who sat quietly weeping, and mouthed something. It might have been sorry, or maybe it was weak. The community reacted as expected. Lucas's supporters believed justice had been served. Nora's defenders saw a broken child failed by the world. Within days, someone graffitied our house. Some called us monsters, others victims. Mom took a leave from the hospital. The administration was swamped with media pressure and internal scrutiny. Before they moved away, I met with Lucas's parents one last time. They wanted a clean slate, a life without his ghost around every corner. His mother hugged me, whispered that she didn't blame me for what happened. His father was colder but respectful. They were starting a scholarship in Lucas's name for students studying psychology, so future kids could learn how to recognize danger, help the hurting before it was too late. Mom and I tried for something like reconciliation. Awkward dinners at neutral cafes, each conversation tiptoeing around the shadow of Nora. Mom looked so much older. Her hair had more gray than brown. She told me she'd thought about selling the house, but couldn't imagine starting over from scratch. Then the paperwork came. Restraining order preparations. Standard procedure for juvenile sentencing cases, the lawyer explained. When Nora turned 21, I'd need legal protections. Sign here, initial there. As if it were just another form. But really, it was a reminder that my sister would always be a looming danger. Job hunting was brutal. Background checks turned up the case. Even the few employers who believed me didn't want the attention. The bookstore owner offered a recommendation letter, but we both knew it wouldn't help in a town like ours. I needed to go. Start fresh, like Lucas's parents. Sarah, Nora's old friend, messaged me on Instagram. She apologized for giving me Nora's journal. She said she felt sick about it, like she'd betrayed someone she'd once cared about. I told her she'd helped save lives, but she blocked me right after. Another bridge burned in the name of justice. Mom's house sat quiet most days. She picked up more shifts, worked constantly. Sometimes I'd drive by and see the light off in Nora's old window. The grief sanctuary she'd built had turned into a storage room for evidence boxes and legal files. Mom couldn't bring herself to change it back or clean it out. 6 months after the sentencing, I got a letter forwarded through Nora's facility. Her handwriting hadn't changed, neat, controlled. The contents were exactly what you'd expect.
mentions of her therapy progress, what she was learning, how she now understood what she did was wrong. But the last line, that was unmistakably her. I'm becoming exactly who they want me to be. I burned the letter in the kitchen sink, watching every line curl and blacken. An hour later, Mom came home and found me still standing there, staring at the ashes. She didn't ask. She knew. We both knew Nora would always find ways to remind us she was still out there, still thinking, still calculating. The scholarship committee invited me to the first event in Lucas's honor. I declined. I knew my presence would only cast a shadow over his memory. His parents sent photos anyway. Bright, hopeful faces. Kids eager to learn about human psychology, to help the ones who could still be helped. Lucas would have loved it. Moving day came quietly. A tiny studio apartment, 3 states away. A job in customer service that didn't require background checks. No questions, no baggage. Just the rarest of things, a fresh start.
Mom helped me pack. We both pretended it wasn't a goodbye. We said we'd text, call, visit on holidays, but we knew the truth. Nora stood between us, even locked away. My new neighbors knew nothing about Nora or Lucas. To them, I was just another 20-something starting over. The anonymity was a relief, like finally exhaling after years of holding my breath. No suspicious glances, no whispers, no social media posts labeling me the murderer's sister. 3 years passed in careful peace. I built a quiet life, made casual friends, avoided anything that might pull the curtain back on my past. Then the call came. Nora had made remarkable progress, they said. The facility was recommending early release at 19 instead of 21. The board wanted input from family members. I submitted my statement opposing release. I didn't appear in person. 2 weeks later, the board approved Nora's supervised transition to a group home. The restraining order meant she couldn't contact me, but I knew better. Nora always found ways. Always had. Mom texted that Nora seemed different, like she had really changed. Therapy had given her tools, helped her manage impulses. She was studying for her GED, said she wanted to go into social work to help other troubled teens. Mom wanted to believe in redemption. I wanted to believe Lucas hadn't died for nothing. Then I saw it on the neighborhood Facebook group. Mr. Delaney's new cat, the one he got after the first one died, found dead in his garden. No obvious cause. Could have been anything. Cats die all the time. But the timing, just weeks after Nora's release, felt deliberate. A message only I would recognize. I moved again. Upgraded my security system. Changed my routine. Maybe it was paranoia. Maybe it was self-preservation. The restraining order was just paper. Nora had learned how to perform wellness, how to show the system what it wanted to see. She'd always been calculating, patient, willing to wait. Life continued, brittle but functional. Work, home, routine. I dated, but never seriously, never long enough to have to explain the weight I carried. Friends remained on the surface, close enough to wave to, never close enough to confide in. Every knock at the door, every unknown number, every unfamiliar figure standing just a moment too long, all small shocks of fear. 5 years after Lucas's death, I stood at his grave for the first time since the funeral. Fresh flowers were already there, a small card tucked beneath. I didn't have to read it. I knew who had left it. Nora had always known how to send messages. I placed my own flowers and drove away, checking my mirrors more than necessary. The students who received scholarships in Lucas's name went on to become counselors, psychologists, victim advocates. His legacy lived in them.
His belief in healing rippled outward into people who could be helped. Sometimes I wondered if Nora followed their progress too, watching, studying what Lucas had hoped she might become. Mom retired early and moved to a quiet coastal town where no one knew us. We met for lunch when I could manage it. Our conversations danced carefully around the permanent absence between us. She showed me photos from Nora's supervised activities, community gardens, soup kitchens, group events, Nora smiling with others, seeming grounded. Mom would talk about her growth, her change. I'd smile and nod, never saying what I really thought. Then came the last letter. It arrived on the anniversary of Lucas's death, forwarded through 3 different addresses, despite the restraining order. The handwriting hadn't changed, still tight, precise. Nora wrote about understanding natural selection differently now, about how Lucas had evolved beyond mere survival, that he had reached something higher. She was studying his example, she said, learning what he tried to teach her. She signed it, "Your loving sister, always watching over you." I kept the letter as evidence, just in case. Nora had gotten better at hiding, better at waiting, but she hadn't changed, not really. She was still testing, still selecting. Lucas's death hadn't taught her empathy. It had taught her patience. And the system? It hadn't reformed her. It had trained her to perform recovery. Some nights I dream of Lucas. He's always trying to save someone who can't be saved. He knew the danger, and still he chose love. His sacrifice exposed Nora's nature. It protected future victims, even though it cost him his life. That knowledge brought cold comfort, but comfort nonetheless. I built my life around that history. Quiet, careful, always vigilant. Nora served her sentence, played her part. But we both knew the truth. She had become something more dangerous, a predator who understood appearances, who could perform redemption while plotting the next test. The restraining order would expire eventually, but I'd evolved too. I'd learned to protect myself, to listen to my instincts, to trust my own voice, even when it meant living alone in the shadows.
Lucas's death taught me that some people aren't meant to be saved, only contained. Nora was contained for now, going through the motions of rehabilitation while I went through the motions of a normal life. We were both performing, both waiting, both watching. We knew this Dax wasn't over, not until one of us stopped breathing. The scholarship fund grew over time. Lucas's parents continued contributing from their new community. Young psychologists entered the field with his story as their foundation, inspired to intervene early, to spot warning signs before another tragedy unfolded. His legacy became prevention, education, awareness, everything he had hoped to offer. What Nora couldn't receive, others did. I kept Lucas's photo in my wallet, a small, creased reminder of the cost of misplaced hope and the strength of documented truth. Nora might still be out there, might still be planning, but it was his evidence that stopped her once. His journal, his backup, his methodical documentation had revealed what I'd struggled for years to prove. In the end, he saved me, even when I couldn't save him. Life moved forward in careful balance. Work, vigilance, shallow connections, always scanning for signs of Nora's reach. She'd shown me that evil could look like a sister, sound like a child, cry like a victim. But she also proved the truth, recorded, preserved, and presented, could win, eventually. The scholarship recipients graduated, opened practices, started identifying children like Nora before they reached a breaking point. Each success felt like Lucas reaching forward through time, saving others he'd never meet. Nora had taken his life, but she couldn't erase what he stood for. His stubborn belief that understanding could stop destruction, that documentation could protect the innocent, that sacrifice could lead to change. I lived in that belief. Quietly, always alert, always aware, marked forever by my failure to protect him, but committed every day to honoring him. Nora remained out there somewhere, performing recovery while planning her next move. But Lucas's voice, through his written words, his digital trail, his final acts, had unmasked her once. If it came to it, it could again. Some dances don't end. They just pause, waiting for the music to start back up. Thank you for reading this story with me. What a journey, from beginning to end. Leave a comment. Doesn't matter if you're first, if you made it to the end, you're already here with me. Just kidding. Love you guys. Peace.